Your son had an accident and we were stuck in traffic. One afternoon, I got a sudden call from the hospital. I was confused because I had no idea who it was. I don't have a son. I thought it was a prank and was about to hang up the phone, but my 4-year-old daughter stopped me. Don't hang up the phone. I was overwhelmed by her serious expression. Because my daughter has a mysterious power and has predicted the future many times, I was trembling with fear when she continued. And after I somehow made my way to the hospital, I was shocked even more. I got married 5 years ago and lived with my 4-year-old daughter, Riko, and my husband, Kayasuka, while working as a translator. He worked at an advertising agency and was often away from home because he was often away on business. My parents were so-called landowners who owned multiple plots of land in the local area and ran a real estate business. My father was the manager and took care of the house for a long time, but 5 years ago he got sick and lost his job. After that, my mother handed over the management rights to my father's younger brother, who was the vice president, and I lived a wealthy life with my inheritance. My mother has always been someone who has been meddling in things, and I have had a hard time dealing with her. I didn't like being interfered with, so after I left home to go to college, I lived without much contact with my parents. I only returned once to announce my marriage, and since then, I have kept my contact to a minimum. I had intended to keep a reasonable distance, but things didn't go the way I wanted. A while after we got married, I gradually confessed to Kayasuka about my relationship with my mother. Even when I was in high school, the word 6 o'clock was used. I had to always report where I was going and who I was going to hang out with. She also interfered with my club activities and study methods, and although I was fed up with it, she told me she was just worried about me being early, so I couldn't strongly rebel. I tried my best to convey those painful memories, even though I was sometimes at a loss for words. However, even when I told Kayasuka what was on my mind, his reaction was already decided. But you're the only mother you have. You should become a parent before something happens and you regret it. He told me so many times that I felt like my feelings were being left behind, and I sighed in my heart. Dad and the bar were good friends. One day on a holiday, a child who was playing with dolls stopped playing, looked at me and said, "You're good friends." Thinking back, my husband was definitely more concerned about my mother than me. He would always tell me to accompany him on shopping trips because he lives alone, and that he should show his grandchildren more often, but he would always refuse. He would not only scold me, but he would also go out of his way to deliver souvenirs he bought on business trips to his parents' house. I received a souvenir from Kayasuka. He's always considerate and is a kind boy, unlike you. I found out about it in an email from my mother saying, "You're really a kind boy." When I saw that civilization, I read only the first few lines and immediately closed the screen. Because I could understand what my mother wanted to say without reading the whole email, I didn't change my mind and tried desperately to keep my distance as before and protect my heart. However, my husband started to get annoyed with my attitude. "You're really innocent. Do you have no human heart? I'm sure my mother contacted me to say that my daughter didn't return her email." Kayasuka, who came home late, was mad at me before I even said, "I'm home." I had no choice but to seriously tell him how much I had suffered in the past because of my mother's interference, even though there was a hint of sarcasm in the words. However, my husband couldn't take care of his family, and there was no way he could raise a child properly. He just yelled at me, saying that it would have a negative impact on our daughter. Such intimidating words from Kayasuka pierced my heart deeply. It's too much. I thought that I had cared more than anything about Riko, and had poured all my love into her. But even that was denied, and I was speechless. Thinking back, it was around that time that Kayasuka started to come home once a week, citing work as an excuse. We continued to live apart without being able to talk to each other properly about our mother. One afternoon, I was having a late lunch in the living room during a break from work at home. The clock must have been a little past 3 p.m. I was feeling refreshed after completing the translation work that had piled up, and my child had finally recovered enough to go to nursery school the next day, so I was able to relax. At that moment, my cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the number that was displayed, but I felt like I had to answer it, so I pressed the answer button. It was a call from the hospital saying that your son had been in a traffic accident and there was a traffic jam. Can you come here right away? ? I couldn't believe my ears when I heard those words. Because my family is just my husband Kayasuka and our daughter. I don't have a son, but I think that's different. Was it a prank call or some other mistake? Just as I was about to answer the phone, that's when it happened. Don't hang up the phone. Before I knew it, the child next to me was pulling on the sleeve of my dress and looking at me with an extremely serious expression. And then I was shocked by what she ran to me next. In fact, Riko had a mysterious power since she was a child. One day, she told Dad that she would buy flowers, and the next day my husband really came back from a business trip with flowers. On another day, the neighbor's cat disappeared, and that afternoon, the owner asked if the cat was lost. At first, I was going to dismiss it as a coincidence. But after this happened many times, I quietly began to believe it. However, Kayasuka laughed it off as a child's delusion and didn't try to fight back, but I held Riko's hand tightly, took a quiet breath, asked the name of the hospital, and immediately started preparing to go. When I arrived and told my name at the reception, the staff guided me to the intensive care unit. Then, when I looked into the bed from outside, there was a boy I didn't recognize at all. He was lying there quietly, unconscious, tied to predators and machines. When I asked the nurse in charge why she had contacted me, she handed me a small hair. The note had my name, address, and even my phone number written on it. I was also shown the boy's school bag, and the textbooks and notebooks inside had a surname I didn't recognize at all. Who is this child and where is he? Why did he call me by my name? In the midst of my confusion, I suddenly saw a woman rush into the nurse's station out of breath. Her face was straight and tears were streaming down her face as she cried out that her son had been in an accident. I then heard her tell the nurse the name of the boy I had seen earlier. Oh, that's the boy's mother. I just watched her silently as she was led inside by the nurse. As I was waiting in the hospital lobby for the woman to come out of the intensive care unit, she appeared. Excuse me. Can I talk to you for a moment? When I spoke to her and gave my name, she looked at me with a smug look on her face. At that time, I told her about the words of my daughter that had led me to the hospital. However, the truth that came out of the woman's mouth was far beyond my imagination. I never imagined that she had such a secret. My heart was pounding and anger was rising in my chest, so I picked up my cell phone with a firm resolve and called a certain person. 2 weeks later, on a weekday afternoon, after dropping off my daughter at the nursery school, I headed to my parents' house. I had also told my husband, Kayasuka, to come over because my mother had something important to tell him. Normally, even if I asked him to do something, he was too busy at work to take time off, but that day he rushed over right away. Mom, I met the souvenir from the other day. I heard it was important, but is there something bothering you? My mother smiled and said, "Thank you, Kayasuka, for always being kind to me on behalf of my daughter," and he replied, "I do it because I like it." But you've been deceiving me all this time. Kayasuka's face froze at my mother's words. My husband stopped moving and asked me what I was talking about, his face dragging. Moreover, there was clearly impatience in his eyes. My mother had been happily telling me by email that my husband had been good to her for a long time. Sometimes he would give me detailed instructions on asset management. He also said that he had carefully checked the location of the bank book and the money order. And my mother had completely trusted Kayasuka, saying that if anything happened, she would leave it all to him. I looked back at the emails from her that I hadn't read properly until then, and the dots started to connect in my head. The reason why Kayasuka had been visiting my parents' house so often in place of me, who had been so distant from my mother, and why he had gone out of his way to deliver souvenirs to her in between business trips. When I realized that it was all calculated to gain my mother's trust, anger and regret welled up inside me. He was planning to get close to my mother, be nice to her, and take her assets for himself. My husband shrugged his shoulders as he glared at me and said that, "Of course not. I was just going there in your place because I was worried about my mother living alone. Stop watching movies." I sighed at his attitude, which was almost like he was invading my rights. In fact, after the incident at the hospital, it was my mother that I had called. Normally I didn't want to call her myself, but at that time I felt that I had to tell her. When the ambulance called, my daughter told me not to hang up the phone, and then she continued, saying to me, to my surprise, that the child was my father's child. At the time, I couldn't believe it, but when I thought about my daughter's mysterious power and the fact that he had held a hair with my name and address written on it, I gradually began to think that it might be true. Then, I told my mother the facts I learned from talking to the boy's mother. "You had a relationship with a woman before you married me. Her name was Kana. I heard that you were watching Kayasuka's child at the time. When he was told that you were pregnant, he replied that he wanted to think about it for a while, and he continued to act like he was buying time. Then, shortly after that, he found out that my parents were wealthy, and he approached me while hiding Kana's existence. He kept telling Kana that he would definitely make a seat for her when his work settled down, but the number of times he contacted her and went to see her had decreased. On the other hand, he showed me a sincere face as a lover, and 6 months later, he was talking about marriage. Naturally, Kana gave birth to a boy in anticipation of his marriage, without knowing that he was married. She seemed to continue to believe that he would come to see her several times a month, and that he would fulfill his promise. About 2 months ago, he said that he would have a large amount of assets within a few years. Then he said that he would definitely get married. Yes, when I told my mother on the phone that those assets could possibly be her real estate and savings, she was quite confused. Apparently, around the same time, he had been told to leave the asset management to her. He would take care of all of her mother's needs. I told her not to let Kayasuka into the house until the matter was resolved, and my frightened mother did as she was told. My husband turned pale in an instant when my mother said quietly that she had heard everything from her daughter. He didn't seem to be able to find an excuse for that, and I didn't think he would be like that. My mother sighed deeply and said, "I was stupid to believe you." As I had been keeping my distance from my mother, my husband was trying to close the gap and do what he wanted. It's not true. My husband was frantically apologizing, saying that he really thought of my mother as his real mother, but my mother quietly turned her face away without saying a word. That gesture must have made Kayasuka nervous. I had been so kind to him up until now, but I had been putting up with it. Kayasuka's face turned red and he suddenly raised his voice. While my mother and I were at a loss for words, the reason we postponed the marriage with Na was because my parents found you rich. He said that if I can't withdraw the money, I have no need for you anymore. We could only be stunned by such shocking words. Now I can go to her without any worries. Just as Kayasuka was about to leave the living room after saying this, the door in front of him quietly opened and it was Na herself standing there. Kayasuka was unable to move at all in front of her, who was staring straight at him, and the blood drained from his face in an instant. I still want to be with you, knowing that she was aiming for the assets of Hyam-san's family by continuing to lie that she would marry him someday. Sweat began to form on Kayasuka's forehead as she looked at him with a sunny gaze. Yuma may have seen through your book. Kana-san's son Yuma must have felt anger and suspicion towards the man who made his mother sad. She said with a bit of sadness that Kayasuka never seemed to enjoy coming to their house and that she hadn't grown attached to him. And 2 days before Yuma's accident, she showed Kana a note. It said, "Wife Takahashi, AIM," and even had their address and phone number written on it. Yes, when I heard about it from Kana, I remembered that about a month ago I had reviewed my life insurance and filled out the paperwork to sign up for a new policy and handed it to my husband. Even though he couldn't read the difficult part, the name on it was the same as the name of the man who came to our house, so he probably realized that it belonged to a different family. Yuma took the paperwork out of my husband's hand, wrote down the address, name and phone number and put it back. I was shocked to find out that Kayasuka was married. But I never thought that Yuma would try to go to his wife's house, so I don't know what he was trying to bring to my house. And on the way there, he got into a traffic accident and was taken to the hospital unconscious in a traffic jam. And it's ironic that the hair that Yuma had was the trigger for him to contact me. If it weren't for Rico's words, I might have never known my husband's true face. I will never forgive him for lying to me for so long. When Kana-san said this clearly, Kaisuke started making excuses, saying that it was a misunderstanding with his eyes blemished. Of course, I have no intention of giving up my assets, my mother said, and my husband held his head. Then he looked at me with pleading eyes and tried to take my arm, so I took a step back and refused. Please. Please forgive me. For the sake of Rico. I looked at him with a clear eye as he cried. If you really care about your daughter, you wouldn't have lied like this. Pack your things and leave now. There is no one here on your side. Kaisuke collapsed on the spot as if he had lost all his strength, but my feelings did not waver at all. A while later, my divorce with Kaisuke was finalized in a tax form. I demanded 2 million yen in compensation, and Kana-san demanded 3 million yen. Was this the reason for his death? Apparently he was fired for making a series of mistakes at work and causing great damage. She had almost no savings to begin with, so she was having a hard time paying her bills, and I heard she borrowed money from a shady company. Now she's working part-time jobs from morning to night, fearing the shadow of a debt collector. She's been doing whatever she wanted up until now, so it's all her own fault. On the other hand, after my divorce, I started to contact my mother more frequently than before. I've been taking Riku home with me more often on weekends, and I feel like we're slowly getting back to a true parent-child relationship. Yuma was discharged safely after 4 months of hospitalization, and is now doing well in his rehabilitation. In fact, Kana and I still keep in touch from time to time, and we've become friends, having lunch together and consulting about childcare. We're laughing about how we both had poor judgment when it comes to men, and we're having a lively conversation between women. From now on, I'll take one step at a time with my daughter.